Hello, hello, everybody. It's good to see you all here. Joe was the first one of today. How are you doing, Joe? We also have Snowbat, Anton, Bodhi, Dennis, Francisco, Magma, and Julia in the chat. Welcome, welcome. I think it's the first time that I'm seeing your name in the chat, Julia. So, lovely to see you here. Hello, Plague Torn. Hello, Liz. Grand Bud, how are you? Yeah, I'm doing good. Doing good. Yeah, I've been doing good. Had a work from home day today, so pretty chill. Usually my work from home days are Wednesday and Friday, so it's like usually like the chiller days. Beginning of the week was hectic. Yeah, just lots of stuff going on, lots of meetings. It's all going good now. So yeah, just the beginning of the week was a little bit hectic. I completely forgot what I was doing Monday. I think Monday was just like meetings and stuff. And then yesterday I had, well, this was my own fault, but like 2 mentorships back to back. So it was literally just like 1 hour mentorship and then another hour mentorship and then all the prep that I had to do before it as well. And then like a little debrief after it. So it was like a pretty long day yesterday. And that on top of like all the regular chaos, right? And I'm still trying to get some stuff done as well. Sometimes, yeah, it gets crazy. Hello, McVal. Hello, Papus. Anchor Gupta and Coleman White are in the chat as well. Love to see you all. Yeah, I hope everyone else is having a lovely week so far. Let me know what you're up to. You know, like what are we all up to this week? So yeah, yesterday we had the 2 mentorships then. And then today, work from home and just getting back into the swing of things for Whip Wednesday. Excited to give a bunch of people some feedback. It's gonna be cool. I think we have, how many people do we have today? 6, 9, I think we got 10 today. Every time I forget, you got the Lex Luthor look going. Okay, Lex Luthor is probably, I haven't heard that one as much. It's usually Walter White. Bathroom fixes for the black mold. Hey, you must live in the UK then. Also work in the challenge stuff. Yeah. Challenge stuff is becoming good. I think honestly, looking at the progression that people have been making, I feel like this is the moment where people are realizing that they don't have that much time anymore and they need to get like a little bit of speed into the whole process, right? I try to like preempt that so much whenever we do like the kickoff for the team challenges. But every time it's more like, oh, it's 5 weeks, like we have enough time. And then usually this is like the point where people are starting to realize, oh shit, we don't have that much time anymore. Uh-oh, better get cracking. Yeah. But overall, the team's looking good. Let's actually have a look. Let's have a look together, shall we? Let's see. Do we have everyone post this time around? Have a look. So the 11. So teams updated their posts like 2 days ago. So oh no, when is this? Not 2 days ago. Oh yeah, most of them did 2 days ago. Okay, let me see where it begins, and then I'll share my screen, and then we can have a look at things together. Most of the teams are in like a pretty good position. Some of the teams are like getting a little bit scary, right? So I'll show you what I mean. Hello, Peanut MR. Welcome. Oh, I'm glad I got like the overlay fixed. So this is the first one of the teams. The teams are all like in random order from like different kinds of people. So quick overview is that we have teams of 5 people. Within 5 weeks, they have to come together and make an environment art piece. So that's what we're seeing here. This is the progress after the review that they just had for week 3, right? So yeah, this is basically, they still have 2 weeks to finish all of this, right? So I'm still seeing like the boat in this one, for example. The boat has me scared. Not gonna say too much about that. I'm curious what the team is gonna do about it. Let's see. But yeah, I do have to say, like, the scene itself looks really nice, you know? Compositionally, like, the idea behind it, like, all the stuff that gets added. Like, there's a lot of potential. It's just, the boat kind of scares me. Are you doing the feedback stream like last challenge? No, actually, we didn't. So we decided not to do that. But, we're gonna have a discussion with that, with the organization, to see if we want to do that next time or not. This time we're doing the feedback a little bit differently as well, because we have 15 teams. Well, we have 13 teams now, but we had 15 teams that were starting the challenge. So that means that the streams get like really long, especially if everyone kind of wants to have their say. And also, like, the way that we're doing it now is that jury members are also involved with giving feedback as well. So it's not only like the organization, but the jury members also help us out a lot, which is awesome. Like a group project? Yeah, like an elaborate group project. That's how you can see it. See, team is opting for like more of a medieval kind of look, which is quite nice. I like the focal point, strong focal point going on. Always love it. We're seeing a lot of statues as well, which is really interesting because that's usually not the go-to for like environment artists, right? Speaking about myself, of course, I'm always a little bit scared of doing anything with anatomy. So it's cool to see though. Like, people are really challenging themselves this time around. We got another team doing a little robot on a crashed spaceship. It's looking cool. Again, the spaceship, right? Like the biggest thing in the scene, still in block out at this moment. Like, that is, again, scary, right? To be at this stage where you're like past the halfway mark. But let's say we're at the halfway mark of the production cycle, right? So there's only 2 weeks left to get like this thing like really good. Obviously, stuff happens in the meantime. Let's see. Team is going for like more attic look. Quite cool. With some of these teams, I have been involved, so it's interesting to see what people are doing. We aren't scared. We outsource some of our stuff. How dare you, Cole? How dare you? We talked about this. Hello, Justin. Keeping things together whilst doing my stuff, whilst getting my stuff done before the deadline for the challenge. It's cool. It's cool. Yeah, that's what I was saying before, right? Like, people are realizing now that it's like, oh, it's only like 2 more weeks. Uh-oh. I saw like a detailed screenshot of this one. Like, this one is looking really nice. Really nice already. Like, good progression. This scene is in like a really good state, I think. Like, take a quick sneak peek. I would honestly say that this team is currently the most advanced, which, don't underestimate it. Like, it opens them up to have like a lot of time for polish, right? How long do they have left? 2 weeks. That's it. There's only 2 weeks left. Scene over here. Doing a lot of lighting changes as well. Oh, that's cool. Got the rope in too. Be cool. Again, a team with a giant boat. Scary. We'll see how this one goes. Again, like the concept and like the ideas behind it, right? Like super cool. Super cool and so diverse. This one over here, more like an abandoned kind of vibe going on. That's looking cool. Also a big fan of this one. Might be biased because I've seen their work. I was part of like the feedback session as well. But I like the changes that they've done, like the last week. Very impactful changes, so keep them coming. And the final two for a quick overview. This looks really cool. The really, really cool shape that they have going on. So yeah, people are going through it. Lots of learnings for both ourselves, like the organization, and also like the people inside of the teams as well. It's been really cool to see like all the teams coming together, working together, solving their issues, like all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting. And obviously, everyone's getting used to source control at the same time too. So, yeah. So yeah, it's going to be down to the wire as it is always, but I'm really excited to see what the teams are going to be pushing out in the coming 2 weeks. It's going to be awesome. Yeah. Was that all 13? I kind of lost track. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, yeah, that's all 13 of them. Just crazy having 13 teams. But yeah, we'll see how they do in the coming weeks. But yeah. Let's have a look. Crunch time is coming. Yeah. For some teams, it might be coming. I'm not sure. It's always a team decision, right? So, like as a team, they have to decide whether they want to put in more work, whether they think that they can, because there's always multiple choices, right? Like you can put in more time. You can also just like really cut out a lot on like the individual projects, right? The thing is though, like when you're leaning heavily into like individual assets, so like the giant boat or like a giant spaceship or those kind of things, like that is usually the task of a single person. And just from like a production perspective, that can be freaking awesome, but can also be so stressful for the rest of the team because this one person has like the entire thing in their hands, right? And if it's not there, what do you do about that, right? But I feel like that's like a part of the lessons learned as well, right? Like just in terms of like team organization, like how do you structure things? Like how do you pick the right people for the right job and all that kind of stuff. It's cool. Cole is saying it's already here. Hey, I thought you were doing outsource. You don't do crunch when you're outsourcing. How dare you? You can't say outsource on one hand and then just like crunching on the other hand. Like how does that work? I mean, to be fair, that's what a lot of studios do. So I guess you're doing a good job. Well, on that note, let's dive into like the actual overpaint for this week. I think we got 10 people, so a longer session than usual. So yeah, I think we got like a bunch of new people today as well. It's exciting. Zaim is unfortunately too late. 9 minutes after the submission deadline. So we'll see you next week, Zaim. Sorry about that. Let's have a look. Route 1 is saying, notice that you do get more time on your own assets in a team instead of making your own scene as more time is against you. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a benefit, right? Like you get to spend more time on the individual things rather than having to focus on like the bigger thing, right? It kind of depends on your role and what your strengths are, right? So if I were to partake in like a team challenge, I would definitely focus more on the scene and then let other people do like the individual bits, right? Because that's just what I like. So it then makes sense that that is like my specialization. Put me on that, right? Mike was saying, if I were a team leader, I'd gather up money and hire someone to make the whole thing for us. Okay. Interesting methodology. And you don't think that's going to be weird when you ask you for like a weekly update? How are you going to convince us about that one, huh? Also, I would wonder. Yeah, that's gonna cost you like a decent chunk of money as well. Hello, color coded insignia. Welcome, welcome. But yeah, let's dive into things. So the first person we're gonna be looking at, I think we're gonna start out with a couple of quick ones. Outsourcing the challenge. Yeah, like, man, if there was one thing that you shouldn't like try to shortcut, is like a challenge that is like has no prizes, you know, like we don't really have like any big like monetary prizes or something like that yet, which would be cool to talk about in the future. But like doing it now would just make no sense, right? Hey Jose, Mencomo. Wow, I didn't know you guys did these environments reviews. Is it every month? It's every week actually. So every week I take like 2.5 hours and I go through like feedback for all the people in our community. So if you want to join, feel free to sign up as a member of our community. Everyone has their own experience in these events. I'm just impressed with how my teammate is still able to churn out great stuff despite having to suffer natural disasters in their area. Oh, yeah. Like, there was a moment, sort of like a story time, right? Like there was a moment when we were working with an outsourced company. Well, we were working with like another Ubisoft studio at that point. We were working on Far Cry, and I remember having a call with them in the morning and having like a volcanic eruption happening at the same time in their background. Literally, they were sharing their screen like on the webcam, and you see like a volcanic eruption like in the background. And it's just like, wait, why are you in this call? Like, are you safe? What the hell's happening? They're like, no, I evacuated. I'm fine. I'm in a different place now. I'm far away from it. Like, I'm not going to get affected. But still, it is such a crazy visual to see. Like, in the background of just like a work meeting, you have a fucking volcanic eruption happening. Which also, like, as a European, barely any natural disasters, right? I've never had an earthquake. I've never seen a volcano in real life. Like, all that kind of stuff, right? So crazy. It sounds terrifying. Yeah, but like all the people were safe, right? So like everyone already evacuated and all that kind of stuff. Like, it was all fine, but it's so crazy. Could have been green screen. I think those people wish it was. But it was like actually like I'm actually not sure if people like got injured. I don't think so, because they kind of got warned like far in advance. But it was a volcanic eruption in like the Philippines. Sounds like a meme in real life you just described. Yeah, it was nuts. Like my brain couldn't comprehend, and they were just like super chill about it too, right? Like in the morning they were all stressed, and they said, before that meeting, I think they said like, oh, there's like something happening, so we all had to evacuate, and then we got like the news that like it was a volcanic eruption afterwards, something like that. But yeah, everyone was fine. At least the people that we talked to. I think you should win one of those one-to-one sessions to get help and feedback on what you're missing. So that is an interesting thing that you bring that up, because that's what we actually did on previous challenges, right? So the winning team would get one-on-one sessions with myself. But there was, let's say, from the winning team, I think we had like the first 3 teams, they could win them. 10% would use them, because the people that win a challenge are usually in a position where they don't necessarily need them anyway, right? So we're thinking about other prizes and stuff in the future. But I honestly 100% agree with Liz. Like the experience is the big prize. Like that's something that I bring up with the people that I feedback as well, right? Is that, yeah, we're kind of doing this as a challenge, and we're kind of doing this to like get you familiarized with like source control and all that kind of stuff too. But it is more about you getting team experience with source control, and then also getting like a really good portfolio project that you can kind of add to your ArtStation, right? Or like your portfolio. That's what it's all about. So taking a little bit of extra time with the team to polish it afterwards, even after we announce the winners and all that kind of stuff, that is like highly encouraged, because that is the thing, what it's all about, right? Obviously the team needs to agree, but yeah. Jose is saying, currently I'm working on a 6-month uni project and I'm making an environment inspired by Kenya. Oh, Kina, which is spirits, right? I'll submit it once I'm done. Struggling a lot with the textures. Yeah. I mean, I would say don't submit it once you're done, because then it's almost too late to give like feedback, right? You kind of want to get like feedback like in between somewhere. And then last question, and then we'll dive into some like overpaints here. Are professional like project management tools being used for the pipeline in those group projects? So like professional organizational tools are kind of like on like the same spectrum as like the commercial ones are. So we use Miro, right? That is, it comes pretty close to what you would expect within studios. So that's one of them. Source control is pretty much like we use a different source control than like, I don't know, Perforce or whatever, right? But like the ideas and like the way that it works is the same. And then that's pretty much it. Like we don't go as deep as using a Jira or something like that, because Jira at this scale with 5 people for like 5 weeks just gets in the way. Perforce is better. I mean, that could also be because we haven't like set it up correctly. But also, what is more concerning is that Perforce is like 100 times more expensive. And I kid you not with that like estimation. Like, it is ridiculously expensive. It is crazy expensive, especially for the scale that we're doing it at, right? With 75 people, we're talking about, well, this is what it basically comes down to, right? Like me as an individual, I'm trying to find a way where I can fund everyone's participation with source control attached to it. And if I then propose that idea to like Perforce, for example, where if they just look at that number, that is like a small to medium-sized actual company that is knocking at their door, right? With those kind of numbers. So, yeah, that's the main reason why we use plastic, because yeah, it's just more affordable. Here's an idea on prizes. Maybe a new desktop setup with a powerful GPU. Oh, yeah. See last explanation, I guess, right? On like the idea of like those ridiculous kind of prices. What we will be doing is we will be talking to vendors, right? That is the next step that we want to do. We've seen that we can actually scale to like a higher amount of people than we've ever had, which is a nice thing. And that also gives us like more bargaining power when we then say like, hey, and we can then say like, hey, we do this thing. Maybe you can sponsor us by like giving like a cheap whatever. Sponsored by Epic. So we kind of tried that already with like the mega grant that they have. We might have to try that again. A team tropical vacation to Bali for 2 weeks will be the least you can do. Come on, the bare minimum. Okay, we're getting off track here, guys. Let's dive into some actual overpaints then, shall we? Let's have a look. So, before this is gonna cost me an arm and a leg, I'm just avoiding any more questions on that topic, okay? Cool. So, first one from Gabrielle Mick. Gabrielle Mick is, I think, new as well. I don't think I've seen your name before. So, first of all, welcome. The decided to make a realistic rifle as I've never had made one before. I wanted to ask some advice on the texturing. The ornaments on the rifle stock look a bit blurry. If anyone has any ideas on it, that would be greatly appreciated. So, in this case, Tim Gross actually did like a pretty good explanation on what was actually asked in that question, right? So Tim talked a lot about like geometry optimization, texture optimization, like what kind of like textures you need to. He's actually shared like a bunch of like really great like references as well that could help you. So I'm honestly not going to be able to add too much more to this because Tim did such a good job on explaining all of it. It basically comes down in like very simple terms is that if you notice that your like texture is blurry, right? That comes down to your resolution first, right? But like you could potentially go higher on this when it's only like only like a 2K. The reason why I say that you could go higher is because you're doing like really detailed, like zoomed in shots, right? If you're going to get really close to a gun like this, you kind of want that crisp detail. What will matter though, is that if you are going to use a 4K texture, I want to see you like make the most of it. So yeah, if we're going to go for a 4K texture, you gotta utilize it. And what I mean by that is I want to see like detailed like texture layering. And there's a bunch of good examples. There's a bunch of good examples online for that, right? Like if you look at most professionally crafted guns or items that are going to be on ArtStation made by industry professionals, you're going to see that sort of layering, right? Where you have your typical dirt, your scratches, your oil, your varnish, like where people have grabbed it, all those kind of layers at that sort of like texture size. I want to see those represented, right? So it's one thing to make it more detailed, but you gotta do it like in the texture itself as well, which you could even do in the 2K version as well, right? It just becomes more important the higher you go in resolution, because the higher you go in resolution, the more detailed you can go in your texture, right? So a way to look at it like this is probably to explain it in a different way, where the higher you go in texture resolution, the more important it is to squeeze out like the maximum that you can get out of that resolution as possible, because you're increasing the importance. If you're working on a game, you're increasing the importance of this in terms of like the whole game, right? Whereas most of the time, like if you're working on a weapon, it's going to be pretty important because it's going to be in like a player's face, right? So that's like pretty easy for a gun, but just something to keep in mind in general. Then I think Tim also talked about like the geometric optimizations. Whenever you see like some of these edges, right, where you can kind of see the geometry, just make it a little bit more smooth, right? And again, that comes down to making like detail shots. If you're doing detail shots, they require you to pay attention to the detail that you're showing off. There is always a level of detachment that's going to happen when you see something on ArtStation compared to what is currently reflected in like a game, for example, right? In the recent years, we've come like pretty close, but like the amount of geometry and the amount of like texture sizes and like how many you use is still going to be above what you would expect in like a game scenario in most cases. So yeah, quick overview. Tim massive shout out to Tim here. He did a beautiful job, like really elaborating on all the things that I've said, and he probably added like a bunch more in there too. I just really skimmed through it. Yeah, he's giving like some good information, talking about like for deciding what to model and what to texture personally on this gun, there isn't anything that I would not model aside from the engravings, right? So this is coming down to like these things that you want to do. You can do that in the texturing. The rest of it, always do that in the high poly, right? Especially when it comes down to like mechanical parts. Try to make them detailed, right? So there's probably like, I don't know how this real gun looks, right? But there's probably going to be a slit in here to help the trigger mechanism, right? And the same can probably be said about like other layers on this gun as well, so that the mechanical parts of it actually are functionable, right? So you got to keep those intact as you are making like a detailed weapon. But yeah. So there's a lot to improve. Yeah, quick overview before we move on is just model the things that you need to model, right? So all like the mechanical parts, like all the intricate parts, like try to model those in as much as possible and keep like very subtle layered detail, like the engraving, keep that for the texturing. Try to have a look at the ground that you're using as well, and if that is in line with what you want to say with like the storytelling of it, right? Because now we're looking at this really like ornamental gun that's just lying on the stone floor. There's a disconnect there in terms of like the cohesiveness of the story that you're trying to tell too, right? So think about that as well. This would probably be more akin to being in like a museum or something like that if we go current day, right? So keep that in mind as well. And then try to see what you can do when it comes to the lighting. Like, we have a couple of workshops on our channel. One of them by Angelo Chivleth, who does like a really good job of explaining how to set up a setup inside of Unreal Engine where it goes from using like the three light setup. He does a great job of explaining that, and that's going to be really helpful here as well. So yeah, go and check that out too. It's all on YouTube, it's all free. Might as well absorb the knowledge. Cool. Then in a bit, we're moving on to Magma. There were a couple of things in the chat as well. So Isaac Clark is coming in. With the progression of the tools in the industry, what things should I prioritize learning as an environment artist to stand out in the sea of other applicants? What you want to focus on is storytelling. As an environment artist, I know that I'm going like pretty broad, but if you can tell a story, like that is going to be applicable to like anything that you want to tell, right? Like obviously you gotta have a good grip of all the technical skills that require you to do your job, but to elevate it above what is currently out there, do focus on the storytelling. That's why like some people, you know, like the hand drills and like the wrenches and like all those really simple props out there, the reason why they get so much traction in a lot of cases is because they are technically executed well, but all the textual layers, they add a story to it, right? Like it adds history to the object. So that's what I would focus on. Because I don't think like we have tools that kind of push like how quick we get to like a certain end result, right? But the underlying fundamentals haven't really changed. So yeah, like the contrast, colors, storytelling, all those like artistic fundamentals to me are like really important. Route 1 is saying avoid cliche projects like the sci-fi corridor. So here's the thing, like I don't think you should, because it comes down to the execution of it, right? And I think there might even be an opportunity in that space. So let's go with sci-fi corridors, right? If you can make a really good sci-fi corridor, you will stand out, because it is so easy to ignore all the shitty sci-fi corridors out there. And trust me, I've made one of them myself. People didn't care about it, you know? Like, you gotta go through those things and like kind of figure out what you kind of want to do. But if you can make a kick-ass sci-fi corridor, people are gonna love it. Maybe do what Dynasty was doing, like adding alien elements. But that comes down to like what you want to do with it, right? And you are probably going to have like a different artistic voice compared to what Dynasty is trying to do with it, right? Because now you're basically doing the same thing that you're trying to say to avoid, is by basically copying what someone else is doing, right? So I think that's actually a good transition into just like, yeah, find your own thing that you love to do, right? Because the issue that I have with people thinking that they need to stand out and like do something really unique is that it kind of like continues all the way through to when they are like a young professional, and then they think that they shouldn't share like any sort of resources because they think like all the resources are out there anyway. And they miss out on this great opportunity to help like the next generation of artists that's trying to get in and trying to learn from people like yourself that are just getting in, right? Like this whole thing that you should just wait until something unique comes up. Nah. Or like spicing things up. Yeah, for sure. Like add your own spin on it, right? For sure. Okay, good to know. Would love to get your feedback on my current environment next stream, where and when would I submit. So if you go to our website and you become a member, you get access to the Discord, and in the Discord you can share your work for next week. I wish I had it prepared for today's feedback session. There's always next week. But yeah, thanks to you, Gabrielle. So yeah, there's always things that you can do on top of like whatever we're looking at. Like for example, Magma's work here that we have on screen, right? This is quote unquote just an elevator, but you can still make it like your interpretation of what like an elevator is, right? And even with this, like an elevator from the 60s is going to look like completely different than an elevator from now, right? There's so much variety and there's so much interest there. Perhaps that's what you were trying to say as well, right one? But yeah, let's have a look. So Magma is working on an industrial elevator. I would love some feedback on how I can make it more photorealistic and less gamey. Let's see. Main ref was playing Silent Hill 2 remake. Not the exact same style, but yeah, definitely thinking that the main thing is lacking from my elevator is the lighting. Not necessarily the lighting. Did Adam bring this up as well? Yeah, focusing on real life references, right? Like the closer you want to get to photorealistic stuff, like a photorealistic like interpretation of something, the more it starts to matter. The more you have to pay attention to like all the details, right? And that is something that I oftentimes refer to as adding character. And what I mean by that is that whenever you have something straight, right? You have this really straight panel. Panels are never straight. If you look at real life, everything is kind of just like a little bit offset, a little bit rotated, a little bit of random rotation in there, right? Like that sort of attention to detail, but like this panel is not just straight in there, but actually give it like a little bit of geometry and kind of have it like just rotated by like 1 degree, right? So that you see like a little bit of like an opening at the top. Right, and even not making the panel fully straight. That could help a lot as well. If you want to get to that like photorealistic angle, you kind of need to have a look at like a lot of references that will help you get there. Let's actually see. I'm not gonna find like any good references from like a random elevator now, I think. Let's see. Elevator panel. Ooh. Is this high enough resolution even? Yeah, for like this sort of stuff, right? Like this is like a very, very modern, very clean panel still. But like what I would do is slightly offset like all the random buttons and like have like a different texture on them, right? Like you can see there's like a piece of, I don't know, like randomness on here. Ugh. There's like a different thing here. Like it comes down to like those very specific kind of things that if you zoom out and you look at the whole environment, you're barely gonna notice them. But it's very subconscious, the way that like people take in this stuff, right? So those things you have to pay attention to. Like the tiny things. Let me see. And obviously like the let's see. Let's type in vintage. Oh god. That's way too old. Whatever. Hopefully you get the point. Like just doing those like tiny things and making sure that if you go for like realism, you kind of want to do more with geometry rather than in texture, right? Or do something with like parallax occlusion mapping to kind of bring out that depth that you're kind of missing. So yeah, first if is adding character. So comes down to nothing is straight. Plus, everything has a bevel. Plus, you can sprinkle in like a little bit of storytelling, right? And storytelling has many, many facets. What you can do here is inspection. Like, there's gonna be companies that do like inspections on these elevators. That can be a way of adding like a little bit of storytelling into it while not deviating from what you're trying to showcase, right? So you could have like a little inspection like panel here with like someone's name and then like a tag on it, like inspected in whatever, right? Like 1980 or something like that. And that can have like a little bit of appeal to it. So like the corner is kind of loosening up because someone tried to like scratch it off there. That sort of stuff is going to matter a lot. A couple of signs and boards and instruction manual stickers. Yeah, it has to just be like pretty subtle. Right, because you got like a sign here, which is quite good. Pay attention to the texturing, where right now it kind of feels like it's blending in too much. Like bring out the roughness variation as well. Yeah, but so adding character, using references, using real life references, right? Very important. And even more important, IRL references. If you can go to an elevator like this and just look at it yourself, that is great. Second best thing is obviously looking at like another nerd that is really into elevators and like takes a bunch of pictures of them. Find those like corners of the internet that are niche. Retro also helps search because most people tag the wrong stuff. Yeah, of course. Yeah, and like Google search is gonna get shittier and shittier over time as well. Never been outside? Well, you don't necessarily have to go outside, you know. You can just look at like the internet. You just have to dig deeper than just Google. You can do this stuff from home. But yeah, that's honestly what it comes down to, right? Like, nothing is straight, everything has a bevel, add a little bit of storytelling into it, pay attention to your texture specifically, because you are, and there's nothing wrong with this, but you are just texturing a box, right? So the simpler your geometry is, the simpler your level itself is by, yeah, just geometric purposes, the more the emphasis comes from the texture, right? In return. And also, last thing that I'll say on this, if you want to go for photorealistic, think about what people's interpretation of photorealistic is and which side you want to go for. The reason why I say it in such a specific way is look at some of the body cam footage out there, right? People keep calling those games where they have like the lens distortion, they call those like the most realistic games, even though the only thing that is new is that it's just like a distorted lens, right? But it makes it look more realistic and it's desaturated. There's still color in real life, right? And it's not like we're looking at it through like a distorted lens. So think about like what kind of like realism that you want to go for. I'm fine with the panel. I'm definitely looking for feedback on the overall elevator. So the best thing that I can say there is look at references, right? Because you're getting to a point where you've done like a decent like base pass on the whole thing. Now it becomes more about bringing out like the more specific textures, right? So people coming in with dirty feet, like where does the dirt all go? Like how does it collect? How does it collect in like the crevices and like the corners? There's probably going to be a chewing gum in there, right? Like those kind of things, like make it feel more realistic. But it comes down to the textures, right? Like how you layer them and like how you treat like the geometry that you have currently. Doors could do with scuff marks from opening and closing all the time, grease, etc. Yeah, exactly. That's one of those things that could definitely help Shazar. I added footprints and fingerprints in there, but it definitely doesn't seem to be coming through enough. This is where one of those things is that we tend to overemphasize things in games, right? Where we try to bring out like more contrast in our textures and in our environments to kind of highlight those things as well. So think about like a way that you could highlight them for yourself. So for example, this, right? Like this is a stereotypical example where you have something that is looking very shiny on like an otherwise like dull like floor, right? And that's a good way of like that contrast between the two is like a good way to kind of massage them into each other. More human than human. Oh, sorry, Turning Gog. I saw that you were chatting on Twitch as well. But you cannot get a puppy. That is still in reference to like the team challenges, right? But I don't think we're gonna afford a puppy for everyone. Would be sick though. We would have so many people applying. It would be nuts. Let's see. What do we have next? So Artyom is next. Let's have a look. Obi. I should just go where the convo is. Yeah, I've heard that people enjoy Twitch more because it has like better stream quality, I guess. So it's up there for people that do enjoy that. Yeah. So let's see. Artyom started a new portfolio project. I want to focus on implementing everything that I've learned in the last 2 years. Also done practicing some lighting with do some practicing with lighting and materials. Oh, I only have the one screenshot here for some reason. There's a couple of other shots for this environment too. Some sketches and architectural references. I mean, I'm gonna be very straight up here, right? Like the references are, or like these overpaints are just like the same as your block out, right? So it's not like there's like too much of a difference here. Yeah, you upload a new version, but like I'm not gonna keep dragging in like images from people during the stream because that's gonna get too chaotic. So we'll just have to do with like the stuff that we have here. What were some of the questions that you have though? Because usually what we try to do on these streams is we have people ask questions, what I can help with. Because it looks okay for now, right? Like you have a block out, there's like a bunch of references. Let's have a quick look here. Let's see. So that's going to be like a lighthouse. Okay. One of the things that I do miss when we're at this stage of the block out is that I'm not really getting. To be fair, you've adjusted it in like the latest version. Let's see. Let's bring in one of these shots so that at least we can talk about something. So yeah, for example, in this shot, right? Like this is starting to go like, this is getting nicer than the shots that were submitted for Whip Wednesday, for example, because now we kind of see like the streets kind of like go wider and smaller, and we're getting like an indication that like everything is like more organic, right? Which is good compared to what you had before, which is like pretty sterile at this point, right? So that's one of the things to keep in mind. Like if you want to get that like very organic, like seaside, like kind of feel, that is the stuff that I would focus on. Like those windy roads and like how organic the streets feel, and like those little, those nice little spaces, right? And like how organic this stuff feels. Like it's not, it's like a wall here, and then there's like a little space with like another wall and another wall and like a garden here. It feels very like haphazard of like, oh, like there was a garden here at some point, but then someone like turned it into something else, and now the city like made like a street through here. So it feels like very organic and very built up by history, right? So there's like a lot of historical layers that are happening here. And that's where the interesting stuff comes from, right? Like the more organic you can kind of make the circle look, the cooler it becomes. Yeah. Right now I'm looking for feedback about the composition. So if we're gonna be looking at the composition, I would definitely put more emphasis on the lighthouse in the back, right? So scale up like the lighthouse that you have in the back, because it almost feels like we're either like at the top of a mountain, like looking down at the lighthouse, but the lighthouse should almost be this like huge point that usually sticks up like way above the houses and stuff, right? So kind of make it like this very tall point. So that would be one thing, if that is going to be like the main thing that you want to focus on. If you want to kind of figure out like the composition itself, I like what this arch is doing in terms of the composition, right? Because it can kind of hint like, ooh, what is here? And it's kind of pulling the person in. What is kind of annoying is that if we divide like the composition up, like we have two of the points almost in like the same half of the image, and there's no real reason for me to ever look at this space, right? So it's almost like you could move this entire piece like back, let's say. Let's see. I'll keep it a little bit more high level. So I would find a way that you could have like a secondary point over here. So I'm calling it like focal point number 2, right? Because this is going to be focal point number 1. Or you can switch them around, right? Like that's up to you. But we're definitely going to work with like multiple focal points. The only thing is that they're too close together now. I kind of want to spread them out a little bit more and give us like more stuff to look at in between. The reason why I'm keeping it so broad and I'm not telling you to just like push this back is because then we're fighting against what you're trying to tell, right? You're fighting against the feel of like, oh, it's all small corridors and it's all small like little alleyways. So you gotta find a way that you can build the best composition while keeping the alleyway still tight and like very organic, right? So maybe this one is not the best solution or like the best composition from the ones that you shared. Have a look at some of the other ones. So for example, this one that we just looked at would be a much more effective like framing device if we then put like the lighthouse in the back, right? The only thing that I don't like about this shot is that we're just looking at like it like straight on. But if you just angle the camera and we kind of have it like more to the side and then it leads into like the lighthouse, like as the main focal point, that could be cool, right? So kind of looking at like the architectural elements and kind of use them as like a framing device to then have like your composition like spelled out. That could be interesting. Maybe make the entrance smaller and move it to the left part of the shot. I don't think like this shot that we have here today is the strongest one for like all the compositions that we see, right? So we have this one, we have this one, which I don't really know what we're looking at, right? Even though you're telling us like there's a lot of things blocking us to the sides and we're just focusing on the things straight on, but there's nothing there yet, right? Which I'm assuming could potentially be the lighthouse, but then you're gonna have to marry all these elements, which I don't think are gonna fit together. Because usually what you want to do, or what you would have in a city like this or like a town, is that the location of the village is going to be somewhat close to like the seaside, right? So it doesn't make sense to have the lighthouse like straight in the middle of the composition, because then that's where the beach would be, right? So that's why I gravitate more towards this one here. It kind of has everything that you kind of want to get through with like your references, and it also has enough maneuverability to do something with the lighthouse. But I think this one is, in my opinion, like the most interesting one to kind of build off on. Especially as your main shot. And that's actually what I would focus on, is get that main shot done first and figure out the composition with that, and then build those like additional spaces, right? You want to make sure that your main shot is good for the first point. But yeah. Senior's block architecture in other works, where is it available? Yeah, it's from Thiago Klavke. Of course it is. Shazar is saying, in my opinion, the lighthouse should be visible in the water, otherwise it looks like a lighthouse in the town. Well, it could be somewhat attached to the village, but it kind of needs to be like somewhere on the edges, right? Like you could do that, but then that just means that the town is going to be very close to the town itself. Maybe increasing the lighthouse can give you the right feeling. Yeah, but I don't think the composition like works well with the current setup, right? Like you could like change the composition on this one here but then I'm not really getting the feeling of like the small streets and the charm of like a small town that you want to go for, right? Not in this walkout, at least. So that's up to you. Have a think about it. Thanks for the feedback. No worries. No worries. Cool. So you should also saying everything is vertical, tilt the walls in the buildings. I feel like if you don't necessarily need to tilt them, right? You just need to make like the shapes of the buildings like more organic, but that's gonna come in like the detailing phase, right? Where like the walls are kind of like they're like a little bit wobbly, like they've kind of gone crooked and wobbly over time. That always works. Okay, next one up in the list is no, not in the list actually. Let's talk to the chat. Who here is in the chat right now and is on the list for some feedback? I saw some people, I think Liz, Bodhi, Alexander. Bodhi, there we go. Bodhi is in the chat. Okay, so we're gonna start out with Bodhi. And then Plague Tom. Which one are you, Plague Tom? Is this you? Not too sure. Not too sure which Tom it is. I got two. Damn it. Radio. Radio? Oh, this one. Okay. I am the houseboat in the swamp. Okay, so we're gonna do Bodhi, then Tom, and then we're gonna do Marcel. There we go. Okay. Bodhi. Look at the artwork of Stanhope Alexander Forbes for the Seaside Town. That could be a good suggestion. I don't know who that is, but that could be some good references for Artyom. Whenever I see Seaside Town, I'm thinking about like the Unreal Engine pack that was released like, oh my god, how many years ago now? Okay. Let's have a look. So Bodhi's working on a haunted forest. Starting to finish up the scene, and I'd love to get some feedback on it. Do you think the scene is missing more story elements besides a skull, maybe in the foreground, and some ground leaves? I can't think about anything else. The path, the black rocks, and the ivy are still work in progress, but the rest, I think, stays besides some roughness tweaks. Do you notice anything else that urgently needs a revision? Let's have a look. So, what did you say was still whip? The path, black rocks, and the ivy. Okay, I see. Yeah. That is cool. I like the color contrast between the whole thing. You got like a lot of green, and then the tree in the middle is like red. So I think that's pretty cool. I would say like the immediate thing that I can think of is that we're barely seeing that like there's blood coming from the cheeks, right? I would like overemphasize that and like make sure that that is like really visible. Make sure that that is like really noticeable, because that's just kind of like falling away now. Lighting looks really nice. Yeah, I think so too. I think... What you could try with the lighting, though, you might have tried this before. But I kind of wonder if it's almost worth experimenting with having less light and going for like a more moody kind of picture, where right now the focus is kind of like a bit broad, right? And I think there's like a really cool opportunity to have the focus be more on the characters, but through the use of a rim light, rather than just trying to fill the whole space up with like just like general light, right? It would be kind of cool to just have like the character like silhouetted from the whole thing. And then potentially, while you're doing that, make sure that there's like a highlight on like the weapon. You can do that with some fake lights, right? It basically we're getting to the point where I would be like really specific with painting lighting, right? So coming in and like having a specific light to like highlight a certain edge in like the main shot, right? Fake light on the character in the trees. Yeah, I think honestly you could get away with having a bit less. We're gonna try something. It was like this. No, that's emphasizing it. Let's see. We're gonna just like really quickly fade some of this stuff out. It's not gonna look great, but hey, we'll make it work. And I kind of want to see if we can. Oh no, I did it on the main. No. Okay. Hold on. Let me get this guy back in here. I need a backup so that we can compare the two. Cool. Ah, what am I doing? Just gonna freaking paint this out like really quick. Same for this guy over here as well. Let's just take this brush. A lot of bloom on it as well, so we're just gonna cancel all that stuff out. Yeah, let's go. Let's maybe do... No. 50. Yeah, because I feel like you got such like strong elements here that it might be easier to just like condense it. Or like really, not condense, but like focus it up onto like the main stuff that you have going, right? That's a bit too light. And I just like specifically highlight the stuff that's happening here. And then about your comment about the bones, yeah, you could definitely increase the bones for sure. Something like this. One moonlight? Yeah, potentially. You could almost like fake it with like just some fill lights, right? Why is it? Oh, because I think, yeah, the image itself has like black borders. Okay. Let's see. Where is it? Wash and blur. There we go. Yeah. Let me just focus it more. Make it like really moody, you know? Might be a bit too much. But hopefully you get the point. Right? That like, because I kind of have the feeling that like the torches are kind of taken away from like the focal point, because they are also the brightest spot in like the whole scene, right? So if we then kind of like cut that stuff out, or yeah, have like torches in the background or something like that, right? So that you could still have like this orange glow coming from the back, but that the foreground is kind of like more bluish. Yeah, it makes the whole thing a bit more focused as well. And then we can really focus on like the things that matter, right? So like increasing the size of the bones and all that kind of stuff too. It'll look good as well. Gonna plus the size on these guys. Yeah, and then definitely the blood, right? You want to like really emphasize like the blood that's kind of coming down. It kind of looks like the tree has a beard now, but you got the point. Yeah. Let's see. And in the path, I think you can do a lot more with the path, but that's still work in progress, right? But the path is going to be like the go-to to kind of have like a subtle like leading line into the whole thing, right? So making it so that the path is like a slightly lighter color than like all the rest of it could work as well. That could be pretty cool. Oh god. Here we go. So we're kind of putting like an emphasis on the path a little bit more. Kind of doing it on the grass too, but you get the point. And just like, yeah, overemphasizing some of the story elements, right? Like the bones here, if you're doing like plus size there, could be interesting to just have same happen here too. And then almost, yeah, it would be cool to kind of have like this sort of like orange glow, like touching like the underside of like the tree, right? Because it kind of gives this like very nice like canopy looking feel. Shazar is actually coming up with something really cool. This is the thing that I noticed in the beginning as well before we dived into the lighting, and that is that the grass is kind of like very uniform. It kind of has like a lot of repetition going on, right? And it's kind of adding like a lot of noise to the floor. I kind of have the feeling that we talked about this before, but just having like more variation in there could help a lot as well. So thanks for bringing that up, Shazar. That's cool. Turning Cog says, every pagan tree I've met has stuff and a ribbon hung in the branches, candles and trinkets at the base. That sounds like such a weird like sentence. Every pagan tree I've met is like, oh, you come across them a lot then. Maybe I just don't pay attention to them. Maybe I've seen a lot of pagan trees myself. And it kind of feels like we're just like, you're living in like Lord of the Rings or something like that, where you walk through the forest and there's like a lot of pagan trees. Let's see. Wouldn't people have over the ages brought like tree offerings? I guess that's what the bones are from, right? Like that is like a way of them offering stuff, and then potentially the blood too. But yeah, you could potentially do more stuff with the bones, right? Like make like a little like, oh god, I don't know what the right word is, like effigies or something. It's Game of Thrones, no? Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm old school, right? Like anything fantasy is still Lord of the Rings to me. No, but this is really cool though. This is really cool. I like the setup. I like the setup a lot. Yeah. Great work, Bodhi. Nice one. Let's see. I think that was it, right? So, do you think the scene is missing more story elements? I guess that's something we didn't really talk about. I don't think you need more story elements. I think the previous point that I made by just potentially doing more with the bones, right? Like increasing the size and then also potentially building like little effigies or something like that at the base of the tree, like Turning Cog was saying. That could be nice. You gotta seek them out. They're not just chilling in your park. This sounds like such a nice side quest. I might just have a look at like, I don't know. It's like very, I don't know. It almost feels like a pilgrimage, right? Like a real life lore that we're kind of going into now, which always has like a very magical tone to it. Yeah, cool stuff, Bodhi. Great job. Almost near the finish line. I think you're on point with like the path. The black rocks, I mean, the black rocks are kind of okay because you kind of use them as foreground elements anyway. But then the ivy, right? Like that's gonna be important as well. I would potentially even think about adding this tree in shadow instead. I would give that a try and see if that helps. Whenever I put things in the foreground, right, I'm kind of seeing like this stuff as like the foreground. So I try to like, well, I guess maybe not this tree, this stone. But I try to make that a little bit more consistent so that they're like really easy to identify. Right? A little bit on the nose for sure. Potentially having that tree as like more black and less lit up as well, so that we're even like pushing people into the scene more than it does now. Yeah, awesome work, Bodhi. Looking real good. So cool. So cool. Next up, we have the radio. Radio from Tom. Let me get some context here. So the military radio. Questions for Whip Wednesday. What is a good target number of tries for the low poly for this model, if it would be a hero asset for a current gen game? So this is a question that obviously gets asked a lot. There's no set poly count though. Like the best thing that I can say is try to make it as low as possible without making it look too low poly. Right? So keep the edges that you need for the silhouette and for the most important details, and then try to bake everything else down. Because if this is gonna be let's see, traditional high to low poly workflow, right? Like there are things that you could bake down into the texture, right? So like some of the smaller holes, some of these like very flat elements, you could bake that down into the texture, right? So see, I think you're already planning on doing that anyway. Yeah. A lot of these smaller things, they could be baked down, right? So it's never like a satisfying answer, but it's just when it comes to the poly count, it depends on the camera, right? So how close you're gonna get, your detail target, which is just like how detailed you want to get with the project. And then also like the workflow that you're using, right? Because for example, if this was mid-poly workflow, you are gonna require more geometry versus like the normal pipeline, because all those small little details, they can be baked down compared to mid-poly, right? So those are like the things that it's limited by. And then I would say silhouette is like the most important thing, like in terms of features, right? And then just bake all the small stuff is texture. And then look at it, right? Like see how far you, like how low you can go. And then see if you can still like be like more aggressive in the way that you need to cut and like how much you have already. The Super Sculpt to start with looks great. Yeah, it does look great. It does look really nice. Has like a very concept designer feel to it, right? To get potentially like a, I kind of want to, because you're asking specifically for a hero asset for a current gen game, right? I know what you're trying to do. Like the question is good, right? There's nothing wrong with the question. It's just that it's so hard to pin that down in terms of like an actual concrete poly count. I think the closest that you can get is just by looking at like stuff that is out there that has like a wireframe and a poly count and just seeing how much they use, right? Because even in this case, right, like a hero asset for a current gen game, it still has a lot of variation between it, right? Because if I'm doing like a detective game where I'm literally gonna be as close as I can get to this thing at all times, you're gonna add more polys to it. But if this is just like a random like military thing that you found in like Call of Duty Black Ops and it's just on a table somewhere, the poly count is gonna be like way lower, right? I say this is cinematic-esque poly count. Yeah, but like it's hard to define that in terms of numbers, right? Which is usually what people are looking for. But I agree. Yeah, like I would go for cinematic quality on this. Can you use POM on something like this? Like for the deep plastic molded parts? So you could, but I'm not sure if I would. Because you're doing a high to low poly bake, right? If that is a thing that you want to go for, then try to get the most out of the actual workflow, right? As soon as you add like POM into the mix, like parallax occlusion mapping, that is where it becomes tricky, because now you're infusing something into it that is technically more reserved for like a mid-poly kind of object, right? Shazar's bringing up a good point as well. Shallow camera angles with POM are usually an issue. So with this camera angle, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if you want to do something like this one down here, you might see where POM is going to break down. And also, like if you want to get good looking parallax occlusion mapping, it is highly likely that you're looking into something like cone stepping instead of doing like the stereotypical, I don't know what the stereotypical like technique is, but like cone stepping makes POM like look way better than like the standard rendering works. The issue with that is that Unreal Engine doesn't support cone stepping. Well, it might support it, but now you're talking about like, oh, I need to basically look for someone that already done that. Hopefully they offer it for free, or build it yourself, right? So that's like a giant rabbit hole that you're getting into. So I would keep it simple, do high to low poly, and just, yeah, keep it straightforward. Hello, the apples. Yeah, you're bringing up a good point, Cesar. Camera angles would be an issue. Yeah, it's going to limit you for sure. It is quite easy when you're doing like static camera shots where you have the flexibility to not go too low, right? So you're kind of covering yourself on that aspect. But I would still try to keep it like pretty clean when it comes to the difference in the difference in workflows. Kind of keep them like more separated. Second question is, how would I render the screen in Engine? Emission shader with a glass shader on top? Do I fade the glass with an opacity map? I think if you want to go for high detail, like you want to separate them out and have like actual geometric difference between them, right? That gives you the most flexibility. So yeah, have them like with 2 separate shaders, 2 separate meshes. That's going to give you the most flexibility. Your weekly streams on your medieval scene make me miss it. Yeah, I know. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've done some art in my personal time. But yeah, I've been doing good. Been doing good. Thank you so much for asking the apples. Hope you're doing well as well. But yeah, keep it simple, right? Most of the stuff, like if you just keep it simple to the point, like separate the 2 different meshes, different shaders, gives you the most variation. Two different materials and meshes. It was great, dude. Wish I had this kind of patience to do something like that. Yeah. I admire people that can just hone their craft, do something like this, right? And just be like very specific on something like so small and yeah, it's just so small, right? Like a single asset. I've always admired it. I've never wanted to do it myself. I'm not a person that focuses on like the micro detail. I want to focus on the macro stuff. But a healthy balance of the 2 is what makes great games. So this is looking sick. Cool. And then we're jumping over to the next person, which is, I think, Marcel. Marcel was up next, I think. Yeah. And then I think after that, we're going to jump on over to Liz as well, because I noticed Liz was in the chat earlier. So, Marcel, my questions would be, thank you, by the way, thank you for having the list of questions. This helps a lot. So thank you for both doing that. That is awesome. So far, I'm quite happy where I'm at, but I think there's something missing to make it stand out more. I don't want to focus too much on the background, and I think the tall grass and volumetric fog helps to create a nice mood. Yeah, I think so too. You can get away. You got some simple stuff in the background. That's looking good. Yeah. You could have whatever you find like on the Unreal Engine marketplace that is free, just as like, I don't know, a little boathouse or something like that in the back. Or what you could do, and this is going to be hacky, but you could literally just rip the top of the boat and like potentially even duplicate the sides of it, and you just have like a couple of houses like in the back, right? And I'm not talking about like a lot of work, right? I'm talking about ripping up like the top from your boat that you have, maybe slapping like a different color on the top of it and just configuring it slightly different. And you can have like a couple of shacks in the back of your scene if you're looking for some breakup. Super easy to do. Like that's literally gonna take you, I don't know, like an hour. Depending on how far you want to put it in the fog, right? How close you're gonna get up to it. Like you can get this stuff like done really quick. But it would be cool to just have like, I don't know, shitty looking shack like in the back here somewhere, right? And then maybe like a couple of pillars, and it would literally just be like, oh, the pillars can be this, and then the house can be this, right? Like just whoop, taking that off there and just putting it in the back. And then you kind of have like a fake background. because the HDRI itself does a good job, right? But there's something about the area in between where you have like the distance and the foreground. They're both looking good, but there's something in the midground that could be nice to have something like that there. Cool. Let's see. Let's have a look at the questions. Which areas could be improved upon? Cables in a plastic container or more overall contrast? Let's have a look. So some areas are quite nice. I'm assuming that this barrel in the back still needs to be finished. That's okay. I would definitely look into having a bit more geometry. So there are areas like this where it is totally fine to add more geometry to make it look nicer than it currently does, right? Because it kind of breaks apart on the edges specifically, right? Like some of them are like really nice. Like for example, the warping that you have on the roof, it's looking quite nice. You kind of have like the warping on the sides. It's mostly like the ends of it where you can really tell that it is just like a hard edge that you try to make it look good. You kind of have to break that up in a different way. What usually can help a lot is that if you have like a bevel, but you change like the width of the bevel to kind of fake that there's like pieces that are broken off, there's pieces that are like bigger bevel, smaller bevel, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that would be good to look in. So yeah, just thinking about like the geometry a bit more, right? And adding a little bit more geometry, especially where it matters the most. So for example, these like very straight things, like you can have like more bending going on, right? Because especially if you think about like what this is trying to do, it is trying to capture water, right? So it might get heavy over time. And then you just have like a slight bend in like the whole thing. And then this could be like kind of bend the opposite way. Kind of makes a thing feel like more organic as well. When it comes to the actual cables, just because you brought that up yourself, you can definitely do more with those cables too. So you could have like, you could just reuse the cables that you have, right? And then just have like a couple of sections where they just like tie around the whole thing. To kind of make it like a little bit more like makeshifty, right? And then maybe this thing is like fastened around the barrel again to kind of keep it in place. Because those details, like they can kind of play with people's mind a lot, where just by adding that, like it gives the impression that this is more handmade than it actually is, right? And then potentially, let's have a look. What can we do here? Maybe this also acts as like a drying rack for this person, right? Again, with the same sort of cables, right? Multi-purposed this thing a little bit more. Yeah. And the beauty about this is that you are not really adding any new assets. You're just making the most out of the stuff that you already have, right? And that's I personally love playing around with like cables, pipes, like anything like that, because it adds so much life to like a space with like zero new stuff created, right? So like the stuff that you have on the front, for example, right? This is great. Try just elaborate on it a little bit more, right? Like have like cable go in here, cable go in here. have it going around there. This connects up with that space with a couple of cables instead of one. And this connects here. That's looking sick. And then maybe we do the same thing here, right? Like cable here, and then it kind of goes down here. Connects with this space. Like even have it connect with the cable itself. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with the cables. And you just make the whole thing feel more detailed, right? That looks so good. And then the same thing here. If you just have like these straightened panels, right? Just like, and this is all with like soft selection tools, right? I would go in and like kind of bend them and kind of like warp them a little bit and just have them like spill out a little bit and make everything just like crooked and broken and bent, right? Coming up with new ideas, connecting everything else with the modeling it too. Yeah, I think that's where I have a lot of fun, because it's more thinking about like, okay, looking at what you already have available and then seeing how we can kind of take that to the next level, right? Let's see, what else do we have available? Because what you could then do is say like, okay, there's multiple cables, but there's one electrical cable and one normal cable. So like above, oh, this is cool. I like this. Above this little table setup that we have going on, there's a little light. Just because if he wants to like sit out on the porch at night and he's reading something, like there's still a light there. You know? You can kind of use that light again to have it like on multiple places. And I'm kind of thinking about it in like a very storytelling aspect, right? Like, I mean, you heard it there live, where I'm like, oh, this light could be nice because I'm seeing this person literally sitting here, like reading a book, right? He's just like reading a book, but then he needs some light. But yeah, warping everything, making everything bend. So do more with the current assets that you have available. And then also, yeah, that's like all the cables and stuff, right? And then also warp and bend everything. For example, there's probably more that you can do with these like floaters as well. Right? I'm thinking, okay, I'm literally thinking about like all the stuff that you have and then thinking about like how we can make more use of it, right? So I'm thinking, okay, we have like a couple of these barrels or like these wheels. What if we have just like one of these barrels over here, and then it is literally surrounded by like those wheels. Right? And then the person that's using this is kind of just like storing all their fish in here. Right, so catches a fish, goes straight into the barrel with like some water so that he can keep them in like fresh water for quite a while before he actually like eats them later on, right? And then you would literally use the same barrel. You just make it like, I don't know, black instead of blue, right? And then you can do something else with it. And you're kind of filling up the space a little bit more. Same with like these ropes and these cables, right? Like, have just like a pile of them, and then maybe it spills off to the side, and maybe have like some more on the floor, like a little thingy here. And again, it's just trying to think about like how to add like more stuff with the things that you already have, right? It's like more rope here. Yeah. And now we're getting to like a nice density of stuff, right? A nice density of stuff. Shazar saying there's not a lot of normal detail in the wood. That's a good point. Like, you could potentially, depending on how you're using it, you could potentially have a couple of like rough wooden planks, right, on your trim sheet, and then just like a couple of clean ones. And then you can kind of use them in places where it kind of makes sense, because these are like the newer planks that look newer, and then you have the older planks which look like more rotten and barren and all that kind of stuff, right? That's a good point. So variation in the wood, and then yeah, storytelling as a way to generate assets, right? Like, what's this person doing, how is he surviving, all that kind of stuff. Same thing here with like the person reading, right? That comes from like a little story that I had in my head. There is probably, for this kind of stuff, there's probably a gold mine online. God, what was I watching recently? I can't remember. I mean, I can remember what was shown, right? But I can't remember how I got to it. But it was a person visiting. Oh yeah, it was Peter Santinello. So that's a person who goes to like places in America and kind of like tries to connect with like the local people, right? And this was like a place where he went to like one of the swamps. I think this was Arizona. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was a swamp location that kind of had like houses on stilts and people like going around in boats, and then they were trying to survive like from the local wildlife and stuff, right? And they had like a bunch of really interesting stuff in their house and on their houseboats and all that kind of stuff, just to, it's bare minimal survival, right? So there was like obviously a gun to go out hunting, some survival equipment. So that would be really cool to look into as well. Not this specific video, right? But just like seeing how those people live, what they kind of need. That could give you like a lot of interesting stuff to look at too. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your work, Marcel. Marcel saying background was just an HDRI for now, just to look dev, changing it up with more overcast, but switching back and forth. Yeah. Alexander is also here. Hello, hello. We're gonna do Liz first. Then we can switch on over to Alexander. Yeah. Thanks so much, Marcel. Best of luck. Matter is a place to share and get feedback. Yeah. Yeah, and thanks everyone for pitching in as well. That's always super appreciated. Oh, wait, I completely skipped over a bunch of your questions. Let's go back. Sorry. Let's have a look here. So the mood is earth and brown heavy. I don't mind. I think color theme, it would be wise to be able to improve it somehow. I don't mind like the mood and the color, right? It just up at that point, it kind of becomes more about like what you wanna convey, right? Like what kind of mood do you want to set? Like, do you want to have like a happy mood where you're trying to like highlight this is like someone's whole life and they're like absolutely living the best life? Or do you just want like a more realistic look, right? Because that sort of mood is going to dictate like what kind of colors you're gonna use, right? How do you approach the nails on the sides being game optimized? I model small nails and place it everywhere, moving it on the trim sheet for... I modeled a small nail and placed it everywhere, moving it on the trim sheet for variation. Oh, this stuff? Like, yeah, if you just use like, I don't know, like 12 triangles or something like that, that is not going to be a main worry, right? Like in games, if this stuff would happen, you would just lot it out really quickly. So what happens over time, just to give you like a quick overview what like an LOD is that games do this optimization technique where the further you're away from an asset, that asset would show you like a visual representation of itself that is less dense in geometry, right? So in this case, what could happen is that if you're at the distance where you wouldn't see the nails, like we're just removing all the nails and that's it. So let's say 10 meters, right? And then at that point, you don't see any nails anymore and we're just going to get rid of all of it. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but that's the way that that works in games usually. Ideally, the only thing that is kind of annoying and kind of a limitation about trim sheets if you're not embedding nails into them specifically is that once you remove the nails, there's no color information on the texture itself, right? So ideally, if you have that color information on the texture itself, then you can still have the geometry, but as soon as that geometry goes, we still have like something that looks like a nail. But I don't think it's a big deal in this case. How many screenshots are good to showcase and talk about a project? I think honestly for that one, go and look at the portfolio reviews that I do. That is a thing that comes up a lot, and I think I talk about that literally in every person's portfolio. So I would probably just point you towards that. That's probably the best that I can do there. Yeah. Thanks, Marcel. Let's move on to Liz now. Where is Liz's work? Oh, there she is. Middle East Town. I'm working on this building, and I don't think the concept art was drawn to be 3D modeled. You are running into a very real life scenario because a lot of this stuff is not specifically made to be modeled, right? Thank you so much for the sub, Madman Maverick. Appreciate that. Yeah, like I was saying, like a lot of these concepts that are made, also in a professional studio, they're not necessarily made with the intent of all the details being figured out. Like a lot of that stuff we still have to do as environment artists, right? So very real scenario that you're running into here. I would like some advice on how to add those rocks at the bottom of the original concept in a way that makes the building look better. Let's see. So this kind of goes into a bigger topic, but like I think the issue with the concept is that it has so many layers that it was trying to combine that I think the best that you can do is to optimize the amount of layers that are there. So since you already are working with brick, I would potentially just do the brick at the bottom as well and kind of just use the same sort of layering that you have and not bother with this stone texture. If you still wanted to have like sort of like this variation, I would probably not split it up with a trim, but I would probably keep it more organic with vertex paint or something like that. And then you could have like a very organic look where this section could be like your organic stone, right? Let's say this section here, and then you have a transition where this is plaster, and then you could still like reveal like bricks on top of it too. So you would kind of have like a couple of different layers to kind of do what you're trying to do now, right? But I would honestly think about like simplifying. That's what I would do. Because also, like, it becomes very chaotic here, right? Like, even if you look at like all the different textures that are used in the concept art, there's a lot happening. I don't think that is necessarily good to create like a consistent building, right? Do I use the same bricks for the bottom? Yeah, yeah. That would be like my go-to because we're trying to simplify the whole setup a little bit, right? If this was my approach, right? If I was doing this project, I would probably lean into the more old look of the building and not use the bricks. Because I think the brick kind of makes it feel a bit too modern for my taste. So yeah, I would probably not use brick myself. And I can also see that you used a bevel here. I'm gonna talk about a different technique in a bit. So that would be my approach. I would probably lean into something that Assassin's Creed Mirage did like very well. What about using vertex painting for the 3 wall variations and adding damage with decals? So you can do that. You don't even need like the damage with the decals necessarily. You can use those layers, right? Like what my concern is that you are blending 3 like very different layers of textures. And I don't think they create like a consistent look for the building. So that's what I'm trying to highlight here. Let's actually have a look. We're gonna switch over to this other screen. Let's have a look. There's some beautiful buildings in this game. Let me see if I can find like level artist. Here we go. Let's have a look at how they approach things. Yeah, so this is the kind of stuff that I would imagine, right? Like the texture itself feels like very consistent in terms of like the building materials that they are using to construct a building like this, right? And then within that, you still have like variation, right? So like the bottom definitely feels like more worn and dirty, and then you have like bits of damage on top of it as well. But like the whole thing still feels consistent. And you can do that with any texture, right? So you can kind of see that they kind of have like exposed brickwork and all that stuff as well. And then just the layers on top of it kind of like it kind of makes the thing feel still consistent, right? But if you try to then have like brickwork and then also have like very organic rocks or stones underneath it, that's where it becomes that is the place where it becomes like a little bit more inconsistent, right? Like, and it becomes just, yeah, it doesn't look good as like a consistent building. What about something more complex? I've been trying to study the buildings in Mirage as well. Something more complex just means that you, in this case, would add more geometry with just more pieces, right? Let's have a look. We were not gonna spend too much time on this. Let's have a look. A rich kit, windows and walls. This is the same thing, right? Like same techniques, same materials, just used in different ways. There's nothing really different to what we saw before, right? Like the main thing that's different is that they use like damage decals on top of it too, that are like very pronounced. So there is like a layer here where they use vertex painting, right, to get like the base variation done, and then on top of it, like Shazar was also mentioning, is that they add layers of like damage decals. So you can kind of see where it kind of clips out here. Like that's like a damage decal that is applied on top of it. So it's literally just like a piece of floating geometry that is mapped to like a separate texture that has like that damage on top of it. And then what I was going to bring up is that a lot of the edges, see if we can highlight one. It's going to be relevant for your building as well, Liz. Is that a lot of the edges, they will add damage decals on top of it to kind of, well, this is a combination of actual geometry, right? So the base geometry kind of feels like it's already broken up, and then they just add like a damage decal on top of it, or a different texture, or a combination of the two. Kind of make it look good. But a more typical technique, especially with exposed brickwork, is that they have like these individual pieces to just add like variation on the silhouettes of a building. So yeah, this would be a good one to study. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening here, but the approach doesn't really change, right? It's usually a combination of vertex painting, of damage decals, and then just like a whole set of materials. We kind of approached it in the same way as well. So if we go to the stuff that I did for Far Cry, no. So these broken houses, right? Like they kind of had like the same sort of setup where all the cracks and all that stuff is just like decals that are like modeled on top of the geometry, like as floating little bits of decals. And that's how they that's how they create like the layering feel, right? And then where you see like the edges, like these edges, that is where we actually like vertex paint. So that's like a variation that we have in the material itself. But it does look decent once those like combinations all come into play. Let me see if I can find like a good one. Like this stuff, right? Like multiple materials kind of blended together by damage decals on the edges and then like cracks at the top. You can create like really complex stuff. Especially if you can use more geometry than we had available to us. Let's see. Okay, let's switch it back. Interesting though about the workflow. AC doesn't need thickness to the walls compared to Unreal for Lumen. Oh, there's so many differences there. I'll let you know like another thing. Very specific to the engine that we were using for Far Cry is that the whole world was divided up in a large grid. You could not have a building on top of one of the lines of that grid because it would break the lighting. So there are specific houses and buildings in like locations, or I think you could have them on the grid if they aligned to the grid. So it literally had to be like 90%, like a 90 degree angle on top of it, and then it would work. But it couldn't deal with like generating volumes, I think, for diagonal sections of interiors. We would really struggle with that. So like all the things that like people are saying about like Lumen and how annoying it is and like how restrictive it is and all that kind of stuff, you are going to have a variation of that in whatever engine you work in. So, but usually, like when it comes to lighting, if you're working in a bigger studio, you don't have to worry about that anyway. So, because someone else is going to take care of that for you. Okay, cool. So let's go back to Liz. So we kind of talked about like the advice for like the rocks and all that kind of stuff, right? And like the textures itself. But you also think that the first trim marked with the arrow has to go as well. Yeah, I think so. Like the issue with these trims, right? And kind of again looking at like the Assassin's Creed work is that those buildings usually don't have trims necessarily, unless we're talking about like the richer buildings, right? That have like decorative trims and they have like a lot of rich elements to them. Like the normal houses, they don't really have that. They just have like a wall that just goes from the bottom to the top, right? So I think that you could potentially get rid of like all the trims and actually focus more on, again, like Assassin's Creed is doing, right? Like on the geometry by having like a more interesting silhouette that you then break up with vertex painting, tileable textures, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I don't think you need the trims. I would, and this is what I said in the beginning of the project, right? Like this project is going to be heavily dependent on texture work, right? So textures and the way that they blend are going to be the focus for this project. So keep that in mind. Are the ones on top okay? Yeah, I think the ones on top are okay. I would potentially look at the way that they look, not necessarily from the concept, but look at what they look like in real life, right? Because I have the feeling that it kind of depends on the materials that they're used, but what oftentimes happens, I mean, this is also brick. So it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell from like just the materials on the building currently, right? But you could have like any sort of variation where they just kind of extended the wall on top of it, and that wall can kind of just be like very organic again, right? That could look really interesting. We would have something like looking very natural, right? And like almost broken up by just like the way that they kind of built it. That could look interesting. Because right now, this trim feels too straight. Or like, it feels out of place. Not necessarily that it's too straight. It's more that like in terms of like the architectural style, that it doesn't really fit. Let me actually look at the concept, right? Let me go back to the concept. Let's see what they had. Yeah, it's kind of a mishmash of everything again, right? Yeah, having it more like a little bit like an organic looking wall. And these are like super simple, right? Because like what you would do is just like extend a geo and just make it texture it like the same approach that you were doing for the wall as well. Yeah. I hope that helps. I think one big takeaway, I think, is looking at in real life references, right? And see what the materials are that people use in that culture to build like their houses with, right? I think getting closer to that is definitely going to be the first thing to focus on. Because as soon as that is done, then like the hard part is over, right? Like not overly relying on the concept and trying to go above and beyond the concept, I think is what What could be good for this one? Awesome. I hope that was helpful, Liz. It is a big, challenging project, you know, and I think I need different references. Yeah, like you always want to, like, it's good that you have a concept, right? That is freaking awesome. Starting with a concept. It's unfortunate that some concepts can also lead you more astray than like help guide you in some way, right? I think that's what we're finding out in real time. So that's why you always want to see like, okay, this person is definitely inspired by the Middle East, right? I'm gonna do my own research and kind of see what like comes closest in terms of like real life references, and then seeing where they deviated and if that makes sense for what I'm trying to do, right? I know it sounds like a lot of work, but that's where a lot of like the learning is going to come from you as well. Like, and this is the stuff that I love to do, right? Like, I love to look at cultures, their architectural styles, and like all that kind of stuff, and like learn from that as well as I'm building something, right? And, like really engross myself into it. And I think that's what you have to do as well. Like, look at real life stuff, and let's like confront like the concept that you're using with like the realistic side of things, right? Where they potentially made decisions that you don't agree with. Because that's something to keep in mind, is that like whenever someone makes like a concept art, that is like that person's interpretation of what they kind of wanted to do with their vision, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense for the way that you want to approach it, right? Because I'll give you an example. In this case, they might just be like, hey, I want to kind of do like a mishmash of different cultures together with like a Middle Eastern spin on it, right? Cool. But then if you approach that with like, oh, this concept looks like it's like from the Middle East, you're kind of missing the mishmash element that they try to do, right? It's difficult to find this stuff out. It's sometimes annoying that you have to do like a bunch of research on top of it, right? But yeah. Bizarre saying Baghdad, Old Jerusalem, Old Cairo. Yeah, there's some great references out there. Cool, Liz. Best of luck. Yeah, simplify the amount of textures. Focus on the textures first. Look at references for that, and then I think you are gonna be in a good position. Thank you. No worries, Liz. Turning Cog is saying, for every architectural style, there are rules it follows. For hierarchy, for details, learning the rules is somewhat hard, but knowing what to repeat or scale details is super handy. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's basically knowing the rule set so that you can go in and potentially break it if you wanted to, right? Yeah. Next person up is Alex. Alex is back with an update. Made some changes to the lighting and the composition. I added unique type of foliage that we can see in the back here. I love some feedback on the foreground and the transition between the land and the bridge. I think this is looking good. Yeah. I like the way that it's looking now. I like the foreground elements that you added into it as well. They kind of tied it into like the midground too. Yeah. I also think this is looking good. Don't really have anything else to say about that. She's also saying, looks way better. And Turning Cog is saying, I've been doing a crash course in neoclassicist architecture for my own project. Yeah, that stuff is super fun. Like, I did a deep dive into like medieval building techniques when I was doing like my medieval project, right? And I specifically went for the time where like glass barely existed, unless we're talking about like the church and all that kind of stuff, right? Like the enlightened people. or metal was like used very sparingly for the things that they needed, right? So like horseshoes and potential weapons and all that kind of stuff, but it wasn't really a thing in the architectural style. And I found it so interesting to do in a deep dive into that and just figuring out like how people like build structures and build like towns and all that kind of stuff when they didn't have like an abundance of metal or stone in that case, right? Super cool. And then finding out that there's like a bunch of wooden forts that obviously didn't make it through like all the pillages and all that kind of stuff. So cool. Yeah. But Alex, I don't really have anything to add to this. I think this is a good update. I love that you added some foliage in the back. I think it has a very unique look to it as well, a very unique silhouette. The only thing that I could potentially say about that is that you're not going to get like the density in like the lower areas, right? Unless you use like a lot of it, but it has a cool silhouette to it. Yeah, cool stuff. Looking good, man. And let's jump on to Thomas with a sci-fi interior environment. Lloyd is being very helpful with this one, adding a bunch of cool resources. Obviously, Lloyd knows way better than me when it comes to sci-fi stuff. I mean, he's worked on Star Citizen, has done Spaceship, so he knows what he's talking about. It's going to be way more helpful than I can ever be on this subject. But let's see if we can still add our 2 pennies on this. So really want some feedback on this specific or just general feedback. What could be done better? Is there anything that may enhance the scene? Any glaring issues or flaws? Besides improving the things I've mentioned, I'm a little bit lost how else I can push stuff. So there is a moment in time where, I mean, it's good that you're asking feedback, right? But like, if there is a moment in time where you're like, okay, like all the new things that I need to add is just coming from like external sources, it might be interesting to think about just being like, okay, what are the last steps that I need to do to just put this on my portfolio, right? Because otherwise you just have to depend on like other people's input necessarily. I think from my perspective, I love what you did with it. I love the materials and the variation in materials that you've added, especially since the last update as well. Like, they're much more readable. They don't feel as flat as they did before. So really good job on that. You've done like a decal pass. It makes the scene feel like much more consistent and cohesive. It feels like it's actually like a part of an environment, right? Let me actually read through what Lloyd has been talking about. Okay. Interesting. But yeah. I think it is in a pretty good state. Like, the main thing for me is still gonna be the story, right? Like, I kind of keep hammering on this a lot, but this is obviously like, you want to like focus us here, right? Which is working beautifully. So the focus goes here, but what are we looking at? Right, because we have some... I'm not even sure what this is supposed to be. Like, I'm not sure what these things are. Right, and then we got like all the pipes and like all the cables like going to it. So something is being sucked or drained or something like that. Right, so they're trying to drain something, but there's nothing here to drain. So I'm quite confused by like how all this stuff is supposed to match together somehow. Because there's also like no attachment points for all this stuff lying here, right? Like there's no attachment point where I could see like, oh, okay, this needs to go here. Cool. So like, I think this is the question that I'm still struggling with. It's just, I'm not sure what we're supposed to be looking at. Stranger is saying the eye is directed to the right, but the right is like an attraction piece. Yeah, I think so too. Or like, even maybe not a single piece, but like if you're trying to point us at something, then it kind of needs to be something that we want to look at, right? A mechanical arm from the roof in that area, moving the crates, would have made great use of that area. That's a potential idea, but then we're still struggling with the cables on the floor, right? So, I mean, it is a good idea, right? Straight up, like having something there as like a nice silhouette, that kind of comes down. I could imagine like, I don't know, like a mechanical arm coming from the top here. Right, like something like that. That would at least give us something to look at, for sure. Yeah, it's what is important and what I want to nail is that there's a whole bunch of random elements, but these elements, they don't come together to build like a cohesive story, right? Like it feels like a collection of cool stuff, but like the cool stuff doesn't really like matter in relationship to each other. That would be the main thing that I would look at, because you've done the scene, right? The scene itself looks good, but like still the main thing, like I'm still missing what it is about. Yeah, that's what I will say, and that's like honestly the most important thing, right? What are you trying to tell? But yeah, that's a good point though, Stranger. I'm just having something there, right? Because like all the stuff that has been added in the latest updates, it is great. Like it moves the scene forward. It has like a noticeable impact for sure, right? But it's not addressing like the core issue of like, okay, but what is really happening down here? Right? Or like, what are we looking at? What are you trying to get our attention for? Yeah, think about that. And think about like the cheapest solution, or like the easiest implementable solution to kind of have like all those things coming together. Cool. And then last one for today. We have an ice shader from Furkan. I've been diving into more of the technical art rather than environment art, and I'm really excited about creating shaders. What do you think? Is it worth to push this more? What would a recruiter or technical artist typically look for reviewing this kind of work? It would be better to showcase at a single post or create a shader dump with a variety of different shaders. Let's see. Even a standalone mobile pump with a floor drain? Yeah, for the previous project. Yeah, I think that's also a good idea. Or something, right, to connect like all those cables up. Like something that gives us like a little bit more sense of like why all the cables are there. Like that's the thing. Like it's just making sense of like all the random things that are there and giving them like a purpose, right? But talking about this, the question is more like in terms of like the industry, right? Is it worth to push this more? I would say yes, but like that depends on the goal that you have set for yourself, right? So it's kind of hard to say something about that. I would say that if you're doing like an eye shader, what I am missing is I want to see more depth. I want to see more layers, right? I want to see like all the layerings below the eyes. And as like an exercise, you could then make it about like, okay, this is an eye shader that has like the flexibility that you would expect, so that an artist can come in and say like, oh, I want to make this more visible or this less visible, and I have like a fully transparent one or like a semi-transparent one. So that's what I would focus on, is the flexibility / the usability, right? Like as a technical artist, usability, Jesus. So as a technical artist, like you are, if you're focusing on this kind of stuff, at least you are helping environment artists and material artists to get to basically improve the pipeline of the whole thing. Very pipeline focused. So that's why I'm focusing on the flexibility and the usability of the shader, right? Because if it just spits out like one thing, it's like a cool demonstration that you can do like one thing. But if you're focusing on like, if you're focusing on that, I want to see better quality, right? And like kind of get closer to like what you would realistically expect like an eye shader to be. But if you're focusing more on like the technical aspects, then making it more flexible and usable for more use cases. But yeah, I would love to see more layering. I think there was actually like a beautiful shader from Concord that I was looking at. So let's have a quick look if we can bring that up. Concord. Where is it? Cube map shaders. Oh, here we go. I think this is it. Yeah, the crystal shaders. This stuff was really cool. Let me share that. I think we actually talked about it on stream from Evan Leon from lead material artist at Firewalk Studios. But this sort of layering is really cool, right? This is kind of what I would expect to see from an eye shader as well, so that you can get the feel of like, oh, we have like the main surface, but there's stuff going on beneath the surface as well. And that's where you can give a lot of control to artists like myself. And I think this is actually like, yeah, this is a perfect post, right? Giving control over like the gradients, how intense something needs to be, the different kinds of like lights. This is what I wanna have as like an environment artist, right? Because now I can go in, slap this on like whatever I've made, and then just play around with it, right? Play around with it, make it look really cool without having to do like a very elaborate setup myself. It's very usable, very user-friendly, right? So this would be like a really cool thing to look at, like as an example. And just showcasing like how other people have used it, right? Because this is like, oh, same shader, but this looks completely different. Right? Looks really cool. And then the beauty happens when an environment artist then can be like, oh, okay, so you kind of did this with the shader, but what if I then like make patterns in it and like cut into the geometry, kind of give it like a specific pattern, add like decals on top of it, and now we're talking about like, I don't know, like a star map that has like a crystal shader on top of it, right? Like the work that you are adding elevates the work that the environment artist is going to do with that shader, right? Like these beautiful synergies that happen within games. But this is a very good example to look at. Really interesting if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Yeah, that is potentially what I just straight up would expect to see from like a post when you're doing like an eye shader. Yeah. usability, the versatility, and then just like it needs to look really cool. Like Plague Tom was saying, looks cool. It does. It does. So I'm gonna share that in the chat as well. So go check out their work. Is Steve Rogers or Rinconi man trapped in the ice? Oh man, I'm so bad with references. That just flew over my head. Yeah. Going back to this then, right? Like the layering is definitely missing, right? That's what I would expect from like an eye shader, like having those layers. So focus on that for sure. And I think that's about it. Let me see if I skipped any questions. What would a recruiter or technical artist typically look for when reviewing this kind of work? I'm not a technical artist. I think it comes back to like the flexibility and the usability of it, right? That is going to be a big part for like a technical artist. For a recruiter, it has to look good, right? Like it has to look good first to like wow them, and then it gets more specific after that. When it comes to like the showcase of like a single post or like a shader dump, it just comes down to like how specific you want to get, right? If you really want to take this to the next level and you spend a whole bunch of time on this eye shader and have like a bunch of different ways on how you can use it, then one post is enough. If you're just doing like, oh, I'm just making material here, material there, have it like in a consistent thing. Yeah. I hope that helped, Furkan. We kind of dove a little bit into the career stuff there, but yeah. Thank you for sharing your work. And we've come to the end, especially hanging on that cliffhanger note with me just not getting any references that people talk about, which is not unusual. But yeah, massive thank you to all the people that participated again. Let me double check if you missed anyone. I don't think so. Don't think so. Oh, Zaim, but Zaim was unfortunately too late. So we'll talk about that work in next week. Hey, welcome, Isaac. I don't know if you're still here, but it's lovely to have you. If you want to join lovely Isaac and you're not a part of the community yet, feel free to sign up in the description down below. With that said, I'm gonna head on out. If you want to get your feedback as well, we have another session next week. And I think not this weekend, but the weekend after, we will do a special stream for all of the team challenges that are going to be handing in their final environments. So that's going to be massive. I'm expecting that stream is going to be quite long. But it's going to be super exciting to see what all the teams have been working on, and I can't wait until then. But on that note, I wish you all a nice evening, and we'll see each other soon. So, bye-bye. Oh, yeah, and of course, Plague Tom. Have a good evening to you too.